Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson. Welcome to Construction Site Management. This is Lecture 2A. And today we're going to be looking at the use of construction documents on the job site. It really refers to Chapter 3 of the Construction Site Management textbook. So make sure you go through that chapter carefully, as there's a lot more detailed information there than there'll be in this lecture. So some of the objectives we have today and in Lecture 2B are really to look at the types of construction documents that make up our contract, and that includes drawings, specifications. In particularly, we're going to be looking at the MasterFromat Specificications, and there's two types of formats in MasterFromat, so we'll discuss them. One's the older version, one's the newer version. The older version tends to not want to go away, so it's still quite prominent. So we'll look at both versions. And we'll talk about the project manual and its components and what that really kind of means today. It's everything inclusive to the project. We'll talk about the different types of drawings and how they're structured typically on large commercial type projects, and how sometimes these documents are used on the job site. So in a separate discussion from these lectures, we'll talk about a little case study and see how they're actually used and how they can be important. I think as the basis, though, first we have to fundamentally understand what are the documents. That's sort of our position one, if you will. When we think about project design, we think about the architects and the consultants, the supporting engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, various building systems engineers. They design the overall project, and they have a vision of what that project should be. And they spend a lot of time figuring out, what are the appropriate materials, what's the proper layout, how the materials are to be installed from a quality perspective. And they put a lot of time and effort into that, and they want to ensure that their vision becomes a reality. So then they put specific requirements down from that, and that becomes part of the project documentation. So when we think about that, we think about the construction documents, and they obviously they're going to describe this project. Is it a hospital? Is it a condominium project? Is it a water treatment facility? What is it? And the materials required to actually construct it, and construct it to the quality expectation that's built into the design and built into their budget expectations. Generally, and again, it depends on the contract type, and we talked a little bit about contract types in the previous session. The goal is to ensure that you're able to get bids. If it's, say, a CCDC2 contract, Canadian Construction Documents Committee 2, that would be a lump sum contract, to get bids that are comparative, meaning that everybody's bidding on the same thing. So it's important to define what that thing is. And so the materials required, the quality of work requirements, what is the expectations with regards to quality? And that will come into the definitions in the specifications to make sure that certain quality standards are being met. And very often then what happens is other certifying bodies are referenced in the specifications, and then you're to comply and meet those reference requirements. So it also gets into installation and systems that are necessary or required in the construction process. This doesn't get away from the fact that the GC figures out how they want to coordinate the work, how they want to align it, and the GC definitely has typically the best ideas as far as the methodology to use during the construction process. So usually the construction documents, they'll have very sort of special language that you have to get used to. There's understanding contracts. That's like another whole area of interpretation of contracts, but really understanding the language that's being used, what does it mean? And like I said, understanding the various referencing to like testing standards and quality control expectations and specifics of material requirements and installation. This typically uses a lot of nomenclature that you might not be that familiar with till you get used to reading the drawings and specifications. And of course, we can always ask and get clarifications on some of the information that's provided, because there's always omissions, there's always errors, and there's always missing detail that you need to get clarifications from the designer. And we use what we call an RFI, request for information process, to gather that information. And that way it's also well documented. Codes and regulations. Now, the details of the codes aren't given, but the references to the codes are. And so, and usually your specifications and construction documents somewhere will say that you must comply with all applicable building code standards. And one are, like, for example, the National Building Code or the Ontario Building Code, if we're building Ontario, will reference other codes like the electrical code, etc. So, you know, if it just says that you've got to comply with all applicable codes, it's a pretty broad statement, which means that if you're dealing with a specialty subcontractor, they're required to follow this outstanding or overarching statement, then they have to ensure that they're complying with the codes. And then if there's something that's contravening that should be brought up, identified. So in the construction documents, the major physical components, we call it the project manual. I would say, you know, again, it's amazing. We still print things, and they can bind them. They're usually actually bound into like a book. All of the digital information from the project is put into a project manual, but ideally clients are going to want this in a digital package so that they can reference it. It can be stored, it can be easily accessed. And if we get into building information modeling and we get into the highest level of BIM, by the end of a project, there's like a whole database of information that's collected on that project, which is a huge aid to, if it's a facilities operator, they'll have the as-built drawings, the as-built documents of the project. They'll be able to manage their facilities. They can do maintenance checks, etc. on that. So that's actually the sixth level of BIM, where the contractor turns over the database of information to the client. But the project manual essentially consists of the drawings, the specifications, the contract, all of that information that's forming part and parcel of the project manual. And so the drawings listed is part of that process. And again, there's many different formats, but you know, there's a 3D model if we're doing a full BIM. So as I said, 60 would be the highest level. That would mean you would have a 3D model. You would also have the orthographic drawings, which would be the floor plans and the section details, the elevations, the site plan, all of the specialized drawings that would be like the structural drawings, the mechanical drawings, the electrical drawings, the landscaping drawings. These all form part and parcel of the construction documents. You have the project manual, which you've got your contracts, and you've got supplementary conditions to the contract, you've got the specifications, and you have the drawings. This is what we have to construct. This is really spelling out what we have to do. So we have to be very knowing and understanding of what's in those documents, and we have to make sure that we communicate that well when we're procuring work from others. One person does not know everything on a large project, so we have to make sure that there's not gaps, that things are being missed, because those gaps come back to haunt us. We call them scope gaps, where we've missed things, and they come back to haunt us later on in the project because maybe we didn't include it in our estimate, our budget. Maybe we didn't schedule the time in for this work. Maybe we're asking subcontractors to do things that they weren't expecting to do. There's all of these problems that fall out from not fully knowing and understanding the construction documents. So Primary purpose, communicate intended elements, systems, and relationships to the contractor. It's a fairly simple statement, but it's a complex statement because there's a lot of interactions that have to go on. And it's, in a large project, those interactions are going on amongst thousands of participants, stakeholders. So at the beginning, there's obviously an advertisement or invitation to bid. Depending on the contract type, we want to collect bids on this project. So this is usually the way it starts out. And what is the bid information that's required? It may be a request for a proposal of services. If it's a construction management or design build type contracts, we will request a proposal from specific entities, or we may advertise for that and see what they come up with based on what we want to do. If we're getting a request for proposal, we don't have the final drawings and design likely, especially if it's a design build contract, maybe if it's a construction management, but ideally construction management's brought on initially, so the construction manager can deal with helping to procure the design and the drawings. So that's what we call an RFP. So you'll hear me say RFP, request for proposal. Whereas advertisement, invitation, bid, again, that could very likely be for a lump sum contract like a CCDC2. They'll give you instructions, how you're to present your proposal and by what date. If it's an RFP, by what date is it due? Same thing with for a lump sum type contract. And do you need to have a performance bond or a bid bond on this project? And if you do, then you've got to make sure that that's part of that. There may be pre-qualification information that you have to fill out to ensure that you can actually bid on this project. And the pre-qualification information is trying to establish, are you capable of doing this work, right? So have you done hospitals before? Have you done this type of work? How busy are you? What's your financial standing right now? So these are the types of questions and documents that fall out of trying to procure the work, and they become part and parcel of the construction documents. The forms are provided for what we have to fill out to bid, and the general conditions of the contract. It's really sort of the general conditions is really the beginning part of the specifications and what we are to provide. So it really is sort of establishing the relationships that are to take place and who is going to be monitoring the work and what the process that's involved with the work. General conditions is not stipulating the exact details of the work, right? It's actually setting up the framework for the work. Supplementary conditions of the contract is really part of any special provisions that are exemptions, requirements that are specific to the particular owner and project. So you have to be very cognizant of the supplementary conditions of the contract. So what are the general requirements of the contract is the relationship between the parties that are getting involved in the contract, and the supplementary conditions is giving it's an opportunity for there to be a lot of details. And if you're not careful signing up onto a contract, the supplementary conditions can really sink you because it can have a lot of requirements that if you didn't pay attention to it could make it that you can't really fulfill your contractual obligations, or it could have a lot of implications regarding cost. So you'd want to be very careful about what is in those supplementary conditions. Additional information to bidders, information not considered a contract document. So it's like a soils report. These are information that's being provided to you to be aware of. And so in your pricing of the project, you should be utilizing this information. So the other aspect of, besides the contract, by the way, the contract is at the highest level. So if there's something in the specifications and there's something, say, in the supplementary conditions, the supplementary condition, and they conflict, the supplementary conditions would take precedence over what would be in the specifications. So if there's a dispute, something that's in the supplementary conditions or something that's in the contract will take precedence over something that's in the specifications. And, which surprises a lot of people, something in the specifications that is different than what's in the drawings, that would supersede what's in the drawings. And then even within the specification, if there's something at a high level of the specification, but then there's something at the detailed level of the specification, that supersedes, the detailed area of the specification supersedes the higher level, because now you're getting into very specific information. So there's these different levels of precedent. That's from a legal perspective. Ideally, when you see a conflict, you just want to get it clarified. You don't want to get down to I'm right and you're wrong. That's not good thinking. What you want to do is just avoid those issues, and if you see conflicts, get them clarified before they become big conflicts. Big conflict would be a drawing says you're supposed to do this, and you do that, and the specification says no, you're supposed to use a different material for that, and now there's a conflict, right? Better to not use the material that was in the drawing, and then you're caught up with it. Or even if you're right and you use the material that's in the specification, but the client really wanted the one that was in the drawing, that's not going to make it a positive experience, right? So the goal overall is to avoid disagreements or problems in your projects. So master format, well, it's kind of like we've got a standard and this is the way that we do it. And it makes life a lot easier on projects. So in Canada and North America, we use MasterFromat Specificitions, and it gives us a process and detailed sections of where information is. And once you get used to it, then you kind of get comfortable with how things are formatted and you know where to look for things. It's not like every new project somebody's designed a new kind of index and a new format and they're all completely different. They're pretty uniform that way, and that's the object of MasterFromat Specifications. It also makes it easier to integrate systems. And so when we've talked about goals and having specific goals and targets and what we want to do, but backing that up, if we have systems in place, it makes it easier for us to do things. So when we're developing a work breakdown structure, when we're using cost codes for activities and we want to track costs, we can adapt and utilize things like the MasterFromat Specifications to make things easier and develop a process for us. So most companies will try to do that and institute that. So it's basically standardized formatting, and it organized bidding, contract requirements, drawing notes, product info, and cost data, as I was mentioning. You really want to try to not be saying things 2 and 3 times. So specifications are helpful that way, that there's a right place for something and it goes in that place. And that can be a profession for people. There's specification writers, large architectural firms. They have special specification writers that's what they do. And they're very comfortable with that documentation and bringing that about and organizing it. It's difficult when you say something more than once when you change it, because when you change something, then you change it in one spot and you leave it in the others, and now you got conflicts. You probably experience that yourself sometimes when you're organizing something and you change something or a code or something and then you don't change it in other spots. It causes problems. I find I have that problem all the time with assignments. If I put the date in certain things in different spots and I change that date, then I forget to change it in the other spots. More conflicts. So that's part of the organization process with MasterFromat, is trying to reduce the opportunity for those conflicts. There's a right place for information in a certain spot. So there are these divisions that are done, and this is using this one that's listed here is I'll call it the newer format. Came about in 2004. The previous format was previously updated in 1995. It had other updates, but there's the 50 division format, which really goes from 0 to 49. And there is the 16 division format. So the 0 is just procurement and contracting requirements, like what we were talking about. And then general requirements is division 1. And then we go up to 49. The 16 division format goes only up to 16. 16 division format, I believe, you can correct me as I'm wrong, around 1960. And it separated all the information into 16 groups. Well, we've talked a little bit about change and how the world is changing so fast. Construction's changing too, and there's all these new things that have come about over the last 60 years, and it was like cramming it into these different divisions, like building automation systems. What building automation systems was there in 1960, right? But now there's a lot of building automation systems, a lot of detailed areas, and trying to organize it functionally under those 16 headings was becoming problematic in a lot of cases. So they broke it out into 49 divisions, and you can go through and you can sort of see these different organizations for the different groupings. As I said, procurement and contracting, general requirements. General requirements is stuff that's not going to be part of the construction process. It's stuff you need to do the construction process. You know, you need to set up the site. There's a whole bunch of requirements that go into that. Temporary power, as an example. So general requirements are stuff that you need to do to complete this project, but it's not physically the project, right? It's not physically the construction of the project. So under the general requirements, you know, you got things like coordination, field engineering, project meetings, shop drawings. And we're going to be spending a fair bit of time, you know, in the upcoming chapters talking about project meetings and shop drawings and submittals and samples and mock-ups and quality control, all of these kind of areas, and temporary facilities, site logistics, contract closeout. So these are things that, again, they're not physically part of the project, but to be successful at building the project, we need to do them. And so this is listed under the general requirements. And so Division 1, it specifies project-related overhead, as I mentioned, related items. And Divisions 2 to 14, we get into the technical stuff. And each section will also break things down within it into 3 areas: general, products, and execution. So general is kind of outlining what it is that's being discussed here. Products is getting specific as to who's the manufacturer of these items, and you can get very, very specific in the requirements of things like what kind of paint, who's the manufacturer, within that manufacturer, what level or code of paint are they using. It can get very, very specific. And if it's a government project, they'll probably have a line for and or approved equals. So maybe there's something there, but you would prefer to use this. And if you submit an approval for that, then you might be able to use that. You might have to give a credit for it. If it's cheaper, you might not. It just depends what it is. And execution, that can get down to, you know, things like tolerance levels and referencing different construction standards. CSA has a whole pile of different standards that are referenced, like masonry work, and it'll reference how plumb a masonry wall should be within that standard. Otherwise, how do you know what's acceptable and what's not? Somebody might say that wall's too far out of plumb, and somebody else might say, no, it's good enough. So reference standards will tie to things like execution and what the expectations are when this material is to be installed. It could be for masonry work and outdoor temperature and how long the masonry work has to be heated for. So it might say 5 degrees Celsius for 48 hours, or it might just simply reference the building code, which happens to be the same. So when I say part 1, general items, so in this case, it's actually just giving the ASTM references here, but this goes on and on and on. So I'm just sort of giving you quick sort of pictures of it. Number 2, products. So what is the products that we're talking about? What are the materials that we're talking about? Exposed aggregate, special facing materials to match selected finish sample. And so there would be a selected finish that would be provided. Execution, do precast concrete work in accordance with this standard. So that means that you'd have to follow that standard. And if you're a concrete subcontractor, then you should know what this standard means and ensure that you are able to apply for that. So that's under the execution. Erect precast elements within allowable tolerances. Again, that would have it in the standard, so you'd know what those tolerances are. To be honest, it's very helpful when you're referencing a standard and that subcontractor is doing the work within that standard, because it helps to lessen the aspect of arguments, because you could get into it where, well, this deviation in the concrete slab is unacceptable, we want it perfectly flat. Well, as much as we like to think that things are perfectly flat, in the real world they're not perfectly flat. So what would be an acceptable tolerance for this? So it could be, you know, it could be a 1/4 inch on 10 feet as an example. What is an acceptable tolerance for deflection? So if you have that, that's good, because now otherwise it's kind of a specification that's written that kind of says at the judgment of the consultant. I wonder if the consultant's having a good day. I wonder if the consultant's having a bad day. That's not very good. But from a legal, and it's not very enforceable either. Those are not good ways of putting things in specifications. Better would be to reference a standard. Divisions 1 to 48 relates to labor, equipment, and again, it's 49. There's some of these sections that are reserved. And so in their imminent wisdom, they left some sections blank because they know that there's going to be new innovations in the next 30, 40, 50 years. And they don't really want to change things. So they've got some room that they can just stick them into those referenced or reserved sections. The original 16 format, and I say was replaced in 2004, but amazingly it's still very frequently used in the private sector. A lot of the condominium buildings are used. I think I'm going to post a sample set of architectural specifications and a sample set of engineering specifications, both for the same building. The engineering specifications are using the 49 division format, and the architectural specifications are using the 16 division format. The good thing is most of the stuff in that sector, not everything, but most of it still keeps the same section number. So it makes it not too difficult to do those kind of things. I do find the private sector is still quite frequently using the 16 division format. Government sectors, another sort of ball game, it typically uses the 50 division format. So in Canada, like we have to deal with metric and imperial, we have to deal with both of these as well. So just get comfortable with them. They're not crazy different, but they're just organized a little bit different. I think that's the best way that I could explain that. Addenda, well, usually that's if you are bidding on a project and something comes up during the bid period. So then you get an addenda to say this is a notification to say this is changing, and you make sure that all the bidders have received that addenda, and then that should be included then in the new price to fix whatever was wrong or missing in the original contract documents. And usually a lot of that comes out of RFIs or questions from people bidding on the projects, and they notice things from that perspective, and then corrections are made. So the goal is to have everybody bidding on the same thing during the project and have it reflect what the work is actually going to be. Clarification or correction of information, approval of substitution. Somebody may want to know in the bid process, is this acceptable? Or additional information that was missed. That's usually it. And think of an addenda, that's a change that's taking place during the bidding process. A change order is different. That's during actual construction. So an addenda is during the bidding process. A change order is during actual construction. So this gives you a comparison between the two. So section 1, the general requirements, they're the same from that perspective. It's just in the master format, they also have the bidding requirements separated out in under 0. Site construction is the existing or the 1995 16 division format. They've called this existing condition. So the title has changed, but a lot of the information is similar. These have remained much the same, as I said. So the good thing is you got your concrete subcontractor, your masonry subcontractor. That would be coming typically there. And then it follows through. They've changed things like doors and windows to just openings. That way it's more inclusive. That includes skylights and other types of openings. Finishes, specialties, equipment, furnishings, special construction, conveying systems, conveying equipment. So those are, again, similar. 15 to 19 are now reserved under the new format. Special construction, like fire suppression systems, comes under 21. Did I have something back there? So there still is special construction, but some parts of special construction are pulled out given their own area because that's become such a prominent and important area. Remember, back in 1960, condominium buildings didn't even have sprinkler systems, right? So mechanical, that's under 15. That gets spread up because, again, they're big issues onto their own. Plumbing is under 22. HVAC is under 23. And again, you can see some reserved sections still. Special construction, integrated automation. So now it's under this area for that. So special construction, you can see, is broken out into a whole bunch of different areas because it was getting jammed up with a lot of things under it. Electrical, which was 16, is now 26. Areas of site construction that weren't in the original area, what do we have under site construction? Let's just go back here. Existing conditions, which is really looking at, well, what is the existing conditions? What's there currently? Is got more information broken up under earthwork, so your excavation, exterior improvements, utilities, transportation, waterway and marine. That's only if these apply, right? So some of these won't apply to your project, but some will. And it's kind of, before it was all under number 2, so the existing part that still stays is under number 2 under the new format, but these other areas are broken out separate. And of course 31 is going to get a lot because every project's going to have a lot of the earthwork side of construction. 11, equipment. Well, again, equipment can mean a lot of things, right? So now it does. And so this is getting under the subsections. Process equipment subgroup. The previous one was site infrastructure subgroup, and this can include a lot of things under it. Eglinton Crosstown, LRT, all of the tunneling aspect. Process equipment, material processing, process heating and cooling. So you're getting into industrial type projects when you're getting into a lot of these areas here. This is like industrial purpose focus. Pollution control, again, under the process equipment subgroup, we're getting into real big sort of infrastructure projects, electrical power generation, industry specific manufacturing equipment, all of those kind of areas. So you can sort of get a handle that there's a lot of sections. You don't have to memorize these sections, you just get comfortable going to it. And as a GC, if you're working in a specific area, some of these you will never really run across. They won't even be in your sort of roadmap of what you need to do. If a project doesn't require it, it doesn't list it in the specification. So only what's required is listed in the specification. So if you don't have anything beyond earthwork, that would be all that would be indicated. And the ones that would be shown would be just the ones that you have work to do in. So unless you're into industrial application, heavy industrial applications or heavy civil, there's going to be a number of these that you won't have to even know or understand. If you're in heavy civil, there's a number of them that'll be what you need to know, and you don't need to know the other ones. If I'm a forming subcontractor, I'm really going to have a lot of focus on concrete, right? Because that's where the dominance of my work would come from. If you're a GC, you've got a much broader spectrum that you've got to be covering. So the numbering system is broken up into a series of digits, and it's usually trying to, this is sort of this little analogy here. Phone numbers, like in pairs, we can remember things better. So that's why they're kind of like grouped in a certain amount of pairs. We're not like exactly like a phone number, but it gives you sort of an idea of how things are broken up. If you just had one long line, it's harder to remember. So the 50 division format is more clear this way. So that's why it kind of breaks it up into these pairings, whereas the original one is kind of like more of a long line, and then it'll have a dot with more detail if it was level 5. So we got level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Level 1 is just your highest level, so that would be division 11. Level 2 is the next level of information, and so it's a broad scope. In most cases, you're going to see that the specification will go down to this level, which is level 3. And then if you're going to get really specific, it doesn't always go here, but if you're going to get really specific about something, it'll have a period and then another level. And there's actually a level 5 beyond that can be very user defined. Most of these are pretty generic and can be sort of copied and pasted, although copy and pasting of specifications can be a nightmare if they're not done properly, because things are improperly copied and pasted all the time, and specifications got, like, you're reading it's like, what does this have to do with this project? And then you put an RFI and you get a response and you find out there was just a copy and a paste and it's not correct, and you got to get that information. But things are standardized, and when it's done well and it is specific for your project, then it makes it much easier to understand and easier to create. So very, very detailed at level 5. Not all that often seen, but it is definitely used. So like lead closeout documentation, and then that might be very specific for your project. So you got from here, this be under the general requirements, and then it's going detailed from there to there to there to there. And all of these numbers for the first 3 are standard. Like, these are all standardized, right? So these are all standardized. And so it's not like a spec writer is coming up with, well, what should I put under number 33? No, there are standard levels of detail. I think I might be able to pull that up if I've got it here. So like, just giving you a numbering system, these are just standard numbers. So if you're wondering what's under a specific number, the numbers are standardized. So like under caissons, and then we got box caissons, and then we got excavated caissons, and then we got floating caissons, we got open caissons. So a lot of detail. These are the standard titles and headings for these various standard numbering system using the 50 division format. So concrete piles. It's not, oh, should I make this 13? Maybe I should make it 10. No, this is the heading for concrete piles. And if we're going to get more detailed on that, well, okay, so we're under concrete piles, cast and place concrete piles, or concrete displacement piles, or precast concrete piles. So they all have their individual numbering for those headings. So that's where it gets more specific. And then if there's something user defined that's specific to your use on this, that's not something that's standard, then you're going to get into the extra level, that 5th level. All right. So that's where you can get the idea of how this master formatting works. These titles are standardized. So that kind of wraps up this section that I wanted to cover, just to give you a heads up on specifications. And I'm going to come back, let you take a break, and then I'm going to discuss level 2. I'm going to do some comparisons, a few more comparisons, just to make sure that that resonates a little bit more with you. And then we're going to take a look at, the types of documents and specifications and the drawings that are required in the documents and how that's applied. Okay, so I hope everybody has a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Tom Stephenson signing off.